Are we ready? Yeah, fine.
It is recording, yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so today we've invited Ben Lamb from 1Berkshire to come and talk to the class here. At the same time, you know, this is being recorded for all of our online sections of this class. I'm going to let Ben take it from here because he has been actively involved with 1Berkshire for probably 6.5 years.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
And he has also grown with the organization. So I will let him explain exactly what he does and then talk about the Berkshire Blueprint. What I find fascinating about his presentation every time I hear it is that there is a concerted effort on the part of 1Berkshire and everybody involved in the community to actually grow and see where the Berkshires will be from an economic standpoint over the next, I'm gonna say 10 and 20 years.
5 years.
5 years?
Ballparking right now. but
Okay.
yeah.
Okay,
You can only plan so far.
there you
right?
go. Okay, so Ben Lamb, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. So first lesson of the day, make sure that the lid of your coffee cup is on securely when you get in your car in the morning. Otherwise, you're gonna dress like this to present to the class. So, I was about 10 minutes ago covered in coffee from tip to toe, and I am glad to not be, but you also get the incognito. I'm also not used to seeing myself on 7 different screens at once when I do this, so that's another surprise for the day. But anyway, my name is Ben Lamb. I am the Vice President of Economic Development at 1Berkshire. As Karen shared, we are the Regional Economic Development and Marketing and Tourism Organization for the Berkshires. So we wear a number of different hats in the work we do. And I'm going to really be focusing on the economic side of things. So another part of our team really focuses on how do we recruit visitors to come to the Berkshires, to spend their dollars here, to drive that element of our economy. On our team, we are really focused on the economy as a whole, and we really act as what we like to say is the connective tissue organization to those ends. So today we're going to give a little bit of a panorama of the economy of the Berkshires, and that will primarily be through the lens of the Berkshire Blueprint 2.0, which Karen mentioned. So just a quick overview of the agenda. So I'll give you a little bit of information about 1Berkshire. Who here knows what 1Berkshire is? I'll just ask that first. Perfect. I love a new audience. Great. And then we'll talk about the Berkshire Blueprint 2.0. We'll talk about our 6 clusters and we'll get more into what that means. Where we are now. So a little bit of kind of stage setting for the way that the economy looks at the moment. Where we are going. So some of that looking forward piece that Karen mentioned. And then finally, I just have a little charge for you at the end because you are all stakeholders in the regional economy if you are sitting in this space right now. So a little bit about 1Berkshire. We were founded through a merger about 10 years ago now. So going way back, there was 4 organizations. Berkshire Chamber of Commerce, which was about 100 years old. Berkshire Visitors Bureau, which was also about 100 years old. And then 2 smaller organizations, Berkshire Economic Development Corporation and Berkshire Creative, which was focused on the creative economy. 10 years ago, those 4 organizations merged together into 1Berkshire. We are a unicorn in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in that almost all other parts of the state, those organizations are separate and competing with one another. We are one of the rare situations where we have actually pulled that together into a coalition, and therefore we are able to leverage resources in a collective impact manner versus having to compete with our neighbors in one of those other entities and potentially just kind of cannibalize one another. So that's sort of the origin story. But the idea here was that we wanted to fully bridge a regional, meaning all 32 cities and towns of Berkshire County entity that could focus on these various pieces of our economy. So what we are now is we sort of have 3 divisions, all under one roof. So economic development, which is me and my team. I have 2 staff on my end of things. Marketing and tourism, they have a team of about 4. So anytime you go anywhere and you might see the Berkshires, or if you see that guide to the Berkshires kicking around in a hotel or a restaurant somewhere, that's them. They are really pushing out the message of why people should come here and why they should visit. Our cultural amenities, outdoor recreation, seasonal attributes, all of that. And then the third piece is we are a membership-based organization. So similar to a traditional chamber of commerce that you might be familiar with, we have about 700 member businesses. And that, again, runs the entirety of Berkshire County. And so we do a lot of work with them to help with state advocacy, to do collective approaches to the state and federal government, to foundations, to really make sure that they're getting the resources they need to thrive as well. I mentioned connective tissue organization. This is a phrase that I actually coined about 6.5 years ago when I joined 1Berkshire, because the idea here is that we can't be everything to everyone, but we try to know everyone and what they're doing so that we can actually connect partners. So we are preventing redundant misuse of resources, but also helping people get more accelerated in the work they're doing by meeting friends and partners that can help them along the way. So we really try to sit at all the tables, connect all the folks, and try to track what they're doing. And that's a big piece of what the Berkshire Blueprint is. And then we're also focused on wraparound economic development. And this is, again, something that we coined along the way. We don't just focus on jobs. We don't just focus on buildings. We don't just focus on dollars coming into the economy. We're focusing on these other pieces too. So, things like, how do we address the opioid crisis? How do we improve our education system? How do we get quality transportation within and outside of Berkshire County? All of those various component parts that ultimately contribute to your economy, either positively or negatively, and trying to help to move the needle on those in whatever way we can. So we treat it as a whole ecosystem and not just this standalone silo of this is economic development. No, because it touches a little bit of everyone's lives. It touches all of your lives in one way or another as well. So about my office in particular, we're busy. I like to say that we are fulfilled or overly fulfilled, depending on the day. So we do around 200 one-on-one consultations with entrepreneurs or existing businesses every year. And that's everyone from I have the spark of an idea to I want to retire and pass the torch, and everywhere in between. And it's also everything from a single person operation to General Dynamics with 1,600 employees. And so we really are an agile team that works with a lot of different folks, which is great because it gives us a bigger vision of what the actual county looks like and where people are trying to do things. We also are a job posting organization. So we have a thing called the jobs thing. We couldn't come up with a name for it 6 years ago. So that's what we landed on, and it just sort of stuck. But it only posts jobs that pay at least $40,000 a year or the hourly equivalent, and are in Berkshire County. And every year we're posting around 300, if not more, jobs that fit those categories, and really pushing those out to try to find quality workforce to fill the quality jobs that need people. So if anyone here is looking for jobs and wants to look at that portal, it's free for you to use. We do charge the posting folks to do it, but for anybody that's looking for employment, it is a good opportunity to know that it's at least going to pay that, and it's going to be within the county. We do a lot of startup and entrepreneurial support. This is something that has grown significantly in the last 5 years. We do a lot of technical assistance and workshops, a lot of connecting people with other resources that will help them to accelerate or incubate their idea and turn it into something that's actually commercially viable. And then we also work with partner programs. So a great one is E for All. Is anyone here familiar with E for All? No. Okay, another great thing to know about. E for All stands for Entrepreneurship for All. It's been around for about 4 years in Berkshire County. They do 2 cohorts every year where they help up to 15 individuals or small businesses move through a pathway to becoming more commercially viable. You are paired with mentors, you are provided a ton of education and resources. And the idea here is to help new businesses start and grow here. And to date, they have over 70 new businesses that they've helped to create that are still open in Berkshire County. So there's been a lot of direct impact, but also helping people bring their dream to life. And so we work very closely with them on a number of things as well. We do commercial real estate matchmaking. So if someone is looking at potentially investing in the Berkshires, or they want to move a business here, they want to expand a business into a commercial site, we source commercial real estate opportunities, some that are very publicly known, some that are more discreet. And we promote those to the right folks that might be looking for those assets to bring their opportunity to bear as well. Our random one is we run the Berkshire Youth Leadership Program. And I say random because it was sort of a carryover over the decades where as the mergers occurred, we just continued these programs, but it's really become a workforce retention program, right? So we have 30 high school juniors every year from across all 32 cities and towns in some way, shape, or form, or at least all 14 school districts we try to have included. And they go through a year-long program with me and my team, where every month they're moving to a different location in the Berkshires. They're learning about a different segment of the economy. what opportunities exist, what they could be doing once they further their degree or graduate high school or whatever the case might be. And so that is now in its 13th year. And every year it gets a little bit better, and we continue to evolve it to meet the needs of the existing population. And we actually have a session coming up right next week, which is all about agriculture, because again, that's another big cluster here in the Berkshires. The Tech Impact Collaborative is a new project that we launched back in 2020. During the heart of the pandemic, we realized there was a lot of folks coming to the Berkshires that were looking to do digital enterprise work. So really focusing on remote work opportunities, how can they have a business without a physical plant? And thinking through like what were the assets and resources that we needed to pin down as a county in order to make that fertile ground for those types of businesses to realize they wanted the quality of life of the Berkshires, but they wanted to do a tech business here. There were definitely gaps. And so we've been working now for about 4 years with us, the Berkshire Innovation Center, and Osher Lifelong Learning at BCC, in fact. And so we've been sort of this triad that's been focused on this, including educational workshops. We've done a lot of grant seeking and acquisition to pull in for infrastructure needs and things along those lines. We've been working with new broadband companies that have now come into the area to provide additional opportunities besides Spectrum to hopefully enhance broadband access to the door as much as we can in the Berkshires. So it's a lot of moving pieces there, but the idea here is that you can have tech and innovation in a rural economy. And in fact, the Berkshires is currently primed for a huge expansion in that particular sector. Only about 5% of tech-based jobs are in rural economies, even though 15% of the population lives in rural economies. So when you think about the ability to start to scale and leverage what that means in terms of a workforce, it's a big opportunity, and we're trying to dig into that because we are in Massachusetts and we shouldn't be left behind when the rest of the state is forging ahead. And then just generally, we dynamically tackle regional issues. And I mentioned a few: transportation, housing, broadband, workforce development. Those things that sort of cut across any industry set are things that we tend to find ourselves acting as a facilitator of the work. My boss is actually right now having a conversation down in Kripalu around the housing crisis and working with folks there to figure out what that looks like. So we're always having these touch points and trying to help people not just do their part of it, but do it all together so that it turns out better. Probably the thing that eats up the most of our time, or at least gives us the guiding light that we need on a day-to-day basis, is the Berkshire Blueprint 2.0. So we started this work back in 2017. It was about 2 years of research, tons and tons of community engagement, outreach, direct contacts with hundreds of folks to put together what was designed to be a 10-year strategic plan for economic growth and sustainability in Berkshire County. So that publicly launched in 2019, which means in 2024, we just hit our 5-year mark. We did do an update on that document, which is why at the bottom line there it says that it's a living document. A lot of times, cities, towns, organizations do strategic plans that sit on a shelf after they do it. The blueprint is absolutely not that. In fact, it is the polar opposite. Every day there's activity that's happening within the blueprint, and we help to work with partners to make sure that they are able to take a bite of what their key component of the document and the strategy is. And so it's very much so a process and not just a plan, but it does have sort of this 10-year lifespan. So we're halfway through it. The document that came out is on our website, so I'll make sure that Karen can share both the original document. If you want to read the full report, it was 84 pages, but the summary is good enough, and it's about 11 pages. And then the update document is around that same length, really focusing on the narrative of what has happened in the last 5 years. And I think most people, even folks that are well educated and informed on these things, were pretty shocked about how much stuff has happened in 5 years to reach that 10-year goal timeline. It is very much so advisory driven and guided. We have an advisory of about 65 industry partners, community members, et cetera, from all across the Berkshires, including some state agencies, including folks like our senator, who all sit on that advisory, meet on a fairly regular basis to address needs, see what opportunities exist, bring up issues that might have appeared or emerged as more important, so that we're continuing to move the needle in the way that it needs to be moved. It's community owned. We don't own it. We are just the facilitators of it. It is a Berkshire document, not a 1Berkshire document. So the idea here is that if you look at the Berkshire Blueprint, there is literally a piece for every single individual in Berkshire County to sink their teeth into. You might dig a little bit and figure out what that is, or find the organization that you want to work with to get there, but there is something for everybody. It's primarily composed of 6 economic clusters, so our main industry sectors, a number of cross-cutting issues, and then these ecosystem-wide endeavors, so things I just mentioned before. So why 6 clusters? So one thing that we identified early on in the work with the blueprint is that we really had 6 key verticals that we could say this is where there's the most scale. So there's the most businesses that are pulling in revenue and generating taxes and helping to drive economics and have the biggest workforces. They had opportunities for innovation and growth. So they weren't just static. They weren't just sitting there and kind of doing the same thing over and over again. There was bigger opportunities for maybe new businesses to start there, or for them to, diversify their portfolio in some way, shape, or form. And they were the easiest ones that we could actually kind of put not a silo, but a circle around and say, this is a sector that you sort of fit in. So there's these really annoying things called NACE numbers, which is kind of how the federal government designates what job or what industry fits into what sector. And we were able to sort of put circles around those NACE numbers in this sense. So it allowed us to track it a little bit easier. So those are kind of the 3 big reasons that drove these 6 clusters. But when you look at them, you can see like advanced manufacturing and digital enterprise, right? We have a ton of about 16% of our workforce falls into this cluster, right? It's a lot of people working in it. It also brings in over $1.5 billion a year in Berkshire County. So that's a lot of capital being generated. Creative economy and culture, right? This is inserted into all of our communities. It's got veins that really impact the quality of life, that do drive a ton of employment, that do bring in a ton of visitor dollars. All of those things pay off. Food and agriculture has been an institution in Berkshire County forever. It's actually on a really interesting innovation and growth trajectory right now. We have new regenerative farming technologies that are being developed here. We have new nonprofit sector partners that are helping to grow small farms and kind of create this new era where young farmers that want to get into the field actually have an opportunity here where they might not have it anywhere else. So there's some really cool stuff happening there. Health and wellness, it's not just healthcare, it's also things like yoga, it's things like just general mental acuity and preparedness for what the world might bring. Those things are all really taking a front stage in a lot of different ways, and we do have technology development that's happening around those things. Hospitality and tourism, again, something that the Berkshires has done forever and continues to evolve in the ways that fit the moment. And you'll see that just pre-pandemic to now, we've seen huge changes and a lot of investment in that cluster in particular. And then outdoor recreation is sort of our oddball in that it didn't exist originally when we did the first blueprint. When we launched in 2019, we only had 5 clusters. Outdoor recreation was not one of them. And then COVID hit, and everyone and their cousin was coming to the Berkshires because they wanted to benefit from the outdoors and what we had in terms of space. And so we actually saw about $100 million of investment happen in a very short period of time into the outdoor recreation sector, which is now driving jobs, it's driving more visitorship. We have the Greylock Glen facility opening actually this Friday, like they're doing the ribbon cutting there. That's a huge investment, that's public-private. So that's like an example of what we saw. You saw Bosque get totally overhauled, like things right in your own backyards that have really risen to the occasion and have turned what was sort of just an asset that we had into a major economic cluster. So where we are now, and this isn't going to cover everything, but this gives you some like high level understanding, right? So we're still in post-COVID recovery. We'd like to say that we, had fully rebounded, but rural economies notoriously rebound slower than urban centers. The interesting thing right now is that we're actually seeing some benefits in rural economies that urban centers are not. So they have huge issues with the amount of commercial real estate space in urban centers that they can't figure out a new use for because so many people move to remote work. Rural economies haven't always had that issue. So that's a space where we're actually able to create some equilibrium. But one thing that we are lagging on now is housing, right? We have about 2,500 unit deficit at any given time, where that's how many quality units we need to bring online in order to accommodate existing folks that live here and the workforce that our employers are trying to bring in. So that everyone has their different challenge, but right now we are still in a recovery mode. Simultaneously, we're trying to figure out resilience, right? How do we make sure that we don't see a huge number of businesses close because people want to retire, right? COVID burnout's a real thing. People got tired. They aged much faster over those 3 years. And so they're more interested in like kind of being like, oh, good, I'm just going to close the business. And they're not thinking about how can I sell it to somebody or transition it to the next generation. So we're also trying to figure out how do we make sure we don't see this deluge when we see the great tsunami really hitting hard. And then next era growth is something that we are really starting to see. I mentioned the entrepreneurial programs. I mentioned the 70+ businesses that eFRL has impacted. I didn't mention things like the Berkshire Innovation Center. They have an accelerator program now. They're spinning off 6 to 7 new businesses out of the Berkshire Innovation Center each year. And these are high-tech, high-growth, high-wage jobs and organizations that are finding their home here in the Berkshires. And when the William Stanley Business Park is ready for reoccupation by those types of businesses, we could see a new boom in the next technology wave happening right here in our own backyards. Just a few highlights. Digital and tech economy growth. I've hit on this a few times now, but it continues to be something that we're really focusing on. We're actually working on a grant application right now to try to get a big dose of financial capital from the federal government to help drive that even faster and further. Ag growth and innovation, like I mentioned, we just had a consult with a guy yesterday who's looking at doing aquaponics and aquaculture. So mixing plants with fish and turning that into full-blown facilities with a whole new technology integrated right here in the Berkshires. So those are the types of things that are happening in the background. And then you won't really necessarily see it until it's like publicly in the newspaper, but there's a lot of people doing a lot of cool stuff, particularly in ag growth and innovation. Patron cultivation and diversification. This really falls into the museum sector, right? So they're looking at, the same people that have been coming here for 60 years. Well, they're getting old and they're not necessarily coming, and they're not necessarily the ones looking to come to a Tanglewood or to Berkshire Theater Company or to Mass Mocha. No, you have to start thinking about what is that diversification of your clientele. And so new programming is coming into play, new ways of reaching them, use of technology to do live tours of museums and things like that that folks can access from home, especially with some of those carryover habits from COVID. So there's a lot of changes and nuances that are happening there, and a lot of investment at the same time. We just did a site visit at Jacob's Pillow. They have a brand new, I think it's ends up being a $14 or a $30 million project that they're doing with a whole new theater because it burned down in the middle of the pandemic. And that's, again, like another major investment, a major anchor point, but it's going to help them to continue to diversify and cultivate their patrons. The workforce crisis, still, probably hear it all the time. It's a national issue. It's very much so a local issue. One of the interesting things is that if you go back 10 years ago now, we actually had the opposite problem. We had too many people and not enough jobs. Now we actually have too many jobs and not enough people. And that has been the case for about 5 years. Since the blueprint launch, that's basically been where we've been static. And a big piece of that is the housing crisis, because we can't actually bring in more people into the region if we don't have a place for them to live. And we can't retain the students going to college here because there's not a place for them to move into after they move out of college housing. So those two things are paired very closely. And that's one of those things where we're constantly sort of arguing, in some cases yelling at the state and federal government about how can they support this. Because again, the Berkshires, we have a low population, a huge geographic area. It's hard to have that voice heard if you don't have everyone screaming from the same mountaintop at the same time. So that's a lot of the work that we do. Transportation approaches, you've probably heard about the West-East Rail or the Northern Tier Rail, or even just kind of like how do we build more efficient public transportation systems within the county. We are looking at some really big investment opportunities probably in the next 10 to 15 years, but these are generational investments. Like the East-West Rail project is something where on the sunny side of things, 2045, the first trains will be running, right? And that's like my 3-year-old will have graduated college at that point. But it is something that we need to be championing now if we ever want to see the light of day on a project like that. So there's a lot of focused energy there, again, both in public meetings and kind of on the private advocacy side of things, to make sure that we don't lose these opportunities just because we're looking so far out ahead. So to your point, yes, 10, 20, 30, 40 years ahead are some of these things that we're looking at. We like to say that we're often planting apple tree seeds in the ground for apples that we will never get to enjoy, but we know that somebody in the future will be able to eat that apple as long as we nurture it to the point where it can succeed. Climate resiliency. This is actually a new add-on from that I didn't do last year in the conversation, because I think, it's really become, especially as we're looking at the hurricanes that are hitting right now, and the various populations that are under extreme pressure there. But even in the Berkshires and Pioneer Valley, we saw it last year. Lots of flooding, unpredictability of weather patterns, and we lose the entire crop for an entire year because of a flash freeze that no one expected, or you see all of these farms just got flooded out and you had $20 million of damage in about 24 hours. Those types of things are not going to go away. And so beyond even just the agricultural side of things, those also then start to impact supply chain. They start to impact the ability for people to have food access. The cost of products goes up. So how do we bake climate resiliency into all operations? And so there's been a lot of work with ourselves and Berkshire Regional Planning Commission, which is another regional agency, to figure out how can we help businesses as well as municipalities sort out resiliency plans based on the climate crisis that we're currently facing. So that is something that is definitely underway as a major focus for the region. Where we're going, right? This is sort of like setting the stage for that, 1 to 20 years out kind of approach. So many new businesses and lots of growing businesses, and I should also kind of nuance that with lots of businesses that wish they could grow, meaning that, again, they can't get the workforce to meet the market demand. We saw a lot of this from our tech sector during the pandemic, where they had products that the entire world wanted, but they could not fill positions to make those products happen, could not happen at the scale that it was being demanded. So there's a lot of that happening, and we need to continue to feed that engine, continuing to help the entrepreneurs start their new thing that could be the next, God knows what, right? It could be anything. That it could be a major growth business here in the region, while also supporting those that already are on a growth trajectory, and how do we get them over the next hurdle. Downtown redevelopment, we're seeing in all different ways, shapes, and forms. Some of that is creative placemaking, whether it's murals and kind of beautification and creating more pedestrian-friendly amenities. And some of that is direct investment in downtown businesses, where we have grant programs or we have infrastructure advancement that's happening to really help to make sure that we're creating fertile ground for the economy to succeed in our downtowns. The third part of that is housing, right? Downtown housing is a huge asset when you have it. There's at least 2 major projects just in Pittsfield alone, which could be another 80 new downtown housing units, right? Those are folks that are walking your downtown corridor, that are shopping in those local restaurants, that are able to become part of a downtown neighborhood, not just living there as transient. Infrastructure investment across the board, right? We know we need a lot more, but it is happening. We've seen a lot of plans for bridges. I know every other week there's another bridge that's being shut down somewhere in Berkshire County. There is going to be a lot of need that is, there's no ifs, but whens in terms of those investments. And so it's a lot of focusing on how do municipalities get the resources they need to fix or update or replace their critical infrastructure. So things like that, water mains, electrical infrastructure, broadband, all of those. Tech industry growth, we are really looking at a moment where within the next 5 years, the Berkshires could become a rural innovation hub. We have a lot of assets. We are, what we like to say, we're at the crossing point of a creative corridor that runs from Burlington to New York City. And we are on an innovation corridor that runs from Boston to Buffalo. And we are smack dab in the middle of both of those primary corridors. So that's creativity and innovation meeting at a center point, which is literally right in Pittsfield. That's a huge thing to capture. We also are blessed by the fact that we have a drive market, which means a market that you can drive to within 2 hours, that has 25 million people in it, which is about twice as many as Boston has in their drive market, because most of their drive market is the ocean. So we have these really interesting assets that we're figuring out how to leverage better, and how to tap into extra regional resources to create that tech and innovation industry growth. So more to come on that. And if you're someone who's interested in that type of work, there's going to be a lot more opportunities for you to actually get baked into, new startups and things like that that are going to be coming to bear in the coming months and years. Regional food identity. We used to have this a lot more entrenched in our identity. We were actually one of the first places where community supported agriculture, or a CSA, was founded. We've had some of the world's top chefs come out of Berkshire County and go off and do amazing things in the world. Recapturing that food identity is something that is happening with folks like Berkshire Agricultural Ventures and Berkshire Grown, and really making sure that we are taking the stuff that's being grown here, turning it into products that can be served here, but also turning it into a food identity that can be distributed to the world. So things that are shelf stable, that can be sent out, packaged frozen here, and sent anywhere and everywhere. And so that's something that is definitely on the horizon in many ways. Gap investments. So we know where we have gaps, right? We have gaps in our transportation. We have gaps in some of our commercial buildings. We have a lot of commercial buildings that could be residential buildings with a little bit extra love. We're still trying to figure out how can we take the resources that the state has put on the table specifically for places like gateway cities and turn that into something that can impact all 32 cities and towns in the Berkshires. And a lot of that, again, is advocacy. This new resident red carpet model is something that we're really excited by, but it has a lot more moving parts than one might expect. So the idea here is how do we make this place attractive, not just to the folks that live here, but also to the folks that might be looking to live here? And how do we embrace them as a community? It's really hard to crack into a community right now, especially in the world that we live in, both with social media, with kind of pandemic hesitancy, things like that. And so we're working on a model right now. We actually have a really great task force put together. How do we help welcome those people in and help them find their micro communities within the broader Berkshires? Maybe that's folks that really like to do D&D. Maybe that's folks that like to do ice hockey. Maybe as individuals that just like to go to the movies together, but helping them find those small micro communities in a place that is very large and sometimes hard to navigate along those lines. And then this last piece is just improving cross-community collaboration. We are still in New England, and New England, the rule is tall fences make great neighbors. And that's been the way for 300 years. We're really trying to break down those fences and figure out how can we create more of a screen door between communities where they're actually now talking to each other, they're working with one another, they're regionalizing on various efforts. We have a really exciting program that we're hopeful for that would actually bridge that in a very tangible and real way with Pittsfield and North Adams and help them do some deep collaborative work that becomes regionally impactful. So we're working on it. Those are things that, you know, if enough people continue to knock on the door and bang their fists on the door, we can continue to move those forward as we look ahead. So this is my last point, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has. But the charge that I have for you is don't live past narratives. We often walk into rooms where people say there's nothing to do here, there's no jobs here, you know, there's no nightlife, there's no this, there's no that, you know, everything's horrible because Sprague Electric left or GE left. And we're now 30 plus years past much of that direct economic trauma that happened when our major industries departed. And so what we have to do is we have to look at what are the things that we actually do have going on. So learn about the immense opportunities that are here, but also identify the things that are gaps that you could see yourself inserting into and actually contributing to. That's why the blueprint is for everybody to take a piece of, because there will always be opportunities to actually have a positive impact. Invest your energy and your abilities into something of impact. You know, there's a lot of ways that we can waste time. TikTok death scrolling is a great one, right? How do we take that energy and that time that's being spent on those types of things and actually put it to good use so that the place that you live in does get better and does meet what you want it to be thinking that way instead of thinking about, oh, woe is us, things are so horrible, because they're really not. Things are moving in many different ways. It's just a matter of grabbing a hold of that and taking a stake in the game. So that is my charge to you. And now I would like to open it up if anyone does have any questions. This is my email though too. So I always like to say, whether if you do have an idea for a business in the future or you're just interested in getting more involved, always feel free to email me. We are, you know, always happy to meet with anybody over coffee or Zoom or whatever the case might be. Any questions? Yeah.
Would there be like a potential plans to possibly look into the abandoned like buildings in Pittsfield and eventually transform into like apartments?
So some of that's happening right now. So the Wright Building and White Terrace, which are both right in the downtown corridor there, they're both currently actively under renovation into housing. So I think the White Terrace is 44 units and the Wright Building is like 30 something.
They're already looking for residents.
Yeah, and they're gonna have,
I just saw that.
yeah, the forms are gonna go out, I think in January, they're gonna start actually accepting tenants in those. So yes, and those are like multi-million dollar projects.
That's a totally new owner, right?
Yeah, so the Wright Building, or the White Terrace Building rather, is a guy out of Albany now that bought it. So he actually had some, a lot of time what happens is outside investors sometimes look at the Berkshires and like, oh man, this building is so cheap. I'm gonna buy that building and then I'm gonna renovate it. But what they don't realize is that it costs the same amount of money to renovate a building in Berkshire County as it does in Boston. But the value of that building is going to be vastly different when they're done. Because here it might be $10 million. In Boston, it's $100 million. And so sometimes it's a slippery slope where it becomes sort of prospecting. And they buy it and they sit on it and then nothing ever happens and it gets worse and then there's a fire in it and, you know, God only knows what happens, right? what has finally happened with that particular building is it is now in the hands of someone who had capital and understands the market. And they were able to leverage some state support and investment too, so now it's happening. These projects take a long time. But yeah, to your point, absolutely, and that's actually like one of the main focus areas is reuse versus build new. Right, because we do have a lot of physical infrastructure, we have a lot of mills, we have all of these things that, you know, have run the course with their original use and now need a new life. And so it's a matter of finding the right pairing of the appropriate owner. And then the incentives and programs that can actually make the dollars and cents pencil out, because if, like, most people are not going to redevelop a building if they're just gonna lose money forever, right? There's gotta be some level of making their money back over time. They're all great people usually, but they can't give away all their money in the process, right?
The old church on Dalton Ave, or was it Dalton Ave? Not where the Dream Center is, but the one up for the made into.
Yeah, Morningstar,
Are they still doing that whole property? or-
I believe so, yeah, yeah, I think actually all of those units are all done. If I'm thinking of the right place, yeah, yeah. And again, some of these projects, you know, like I think about Eagle Mill and Lee, right? Like, that's been a project 10 years in the making, right? And they just put a shovel in the ground last spring, I think it was, and started demolition of some of the old buildings. So, you know, it's a labor of love for a lot of these developers. And in some cases, it's too big of an effort for them, and they just need to find a way to transition into the next person who. You know, the mall is another example, right? Like, you know, you have the vacant mall, like that could be so many things, but all of those things are gonna take a lot of money. And so it's a matter of finding, like, how do you get it to transition to the right point for it?
Are they still doing something with the old fire department next to Dairy Queen? I know they're.
Yeah, that's 4 units now.
Making that.
Yeah, Carver did that, CT Management
They
renovated
just
that building.
finally made it into apartments?
Yeah, it's 4 units.
Oh, wow, I didn't know, they didn't even say they do any work there.
They're usually pretty, you're talking about on Tyler,
Right
right?
on Tyler Street,
Yeah.
right next to
Yeah.
DQ.
Yep. That's open, they're all occupied.
Any other questions? So I have a question. You're talking to a group of business students. So as we talk about workforce development in the area, what skills do you think are going to be important within the next 5 to 10 years for them to ease into these jobs that might be out there?
So every small business on the planet right now, well, at least in our world, is looking for folks that are really good with numbers and really good with writing. Those are 2 primary areas where, when you're a business owner, at least when you're starting out, you have to be very scrappy, right? You have to do a little bit of everything to make sure that you can get your thing up and running and operating. But once they start to scale, they need to pull in people that have the ability to carry on those various tasks that they can't reasonably do while also trying to do HR and this and this and this, and also being an expert in their particular product. So that continues to be a major gap. I think one of the most interesting conversations that we've been having with folks, and it's been a few years of hearing this now, is just having business acumen, right? Understanding what it means to go to work and what it means to work for somebody else. Not while everybody wants to be a content creator on Instagram or whatever and make, you know, ungodly amounts of money, that's not the way that most of the world is working. And going forward, that's not necessarily stable in terms of economics. So they need people that know how to show up, you know, really bring that professional attitude to the table. You know how to write an email that's not like, hey, brah, what's up? You know, because we're still getting folks that are sending emails to us that looks like they wrote it on their phone via text message and, you know, are missing a whole lot of syllables and vowels. You really need to be focused on how do you convey communication in a professional manner so that anybody that reads is going to think, wow, this is a business that I want to work with. And so that, you know, it used to be the joke of, I just need someone that can put their pants on in the morning. Well, yes, and, right? You also need to be able to come into the space with them and have them feel confident that they can hand you a project and move it forward. And if there's not that ability to communicate professionally, to understand what the numbers mean, to understand how the business is structured now and where it wants to be next, then they're gonna probably not keep you around all that long. Unless they're extremely desperate, and then they are in the mode of I'll take anybody. But a lot of them are looking for kind of what I would call in many ways liberal arts mentalities, where you're able to adapt to their particular needs, but you have a standard set of understanding in that business, accounting, economics realm. But writing is huge. You know, AI can only do so much. And AI needs editors too. So I think, you know, we like to say that AI is not taking away jobs, but it is evolving the way the job is done. And I think that's really critical. Like that would be it's unrelated to business per se, but I would say developing a base understanding of how to utilize the various AI tools that are out there on the market, both for professional and personal use, is certainly something that I might suggest you do just sort of on your own, whether it's through coursework or not. Because the folks that have that, it's almost like knowing a second language. So, you know, being bilingual is definitely an asset when you go into a workplace now. Also, having an understanding of AI, I would start to put within that same train of thought, because it's not going anywhere.
Like they got a restaurant, I think it's out in Texas, that's all run by robots.
Yeah. I mean, just think about the self-checkout stations at pretty much every major, you know, even some of the smaller grocery stores now are doing that. It's, you know, that technology integration, but at the same time, someone has to maintain that equipment, you know, and if you can pivot the workforce to instead focusing on the quality of the experience in the store, right? Like there's a lot of ways that things can shift in a workplace if you use technology to take away sort of the scanner, right? Like that person can be so much more than just a scanner. Right, so how do you maximize the use of that person's skills in the workplace versus them being kind of relegated to an entry-level position like that, right?
Yeah, you'd have to at least help.
Yeah.
To fix whatever goes wrong.
That's technology, right? So that's, you know, that's, yeah. But I think like folks in business, legal, and cybersecurity, like those are three huge areas that pretty much every business in some way, shape, or form is gonna need those. Because that's just the way that kind of structure, you could be a healthcare, or agriculture, or an innovation business, and you're going to need elements of those positions regardless.
Any other final? You know that at the end of this, if you have an additional question, that Ben's email is there, so you can only email him if you wake up at 2 AM and go, "Oh, I really wanted to ask that question." Please feel free to.
I'll try not to respond.
Okay, Ben, thank you for your time.
Absolutely, good to see you all, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I will see you guys on Thursday. And we'll have a lot to get through.